Welcome to the Sage Solutions Podcast, where we talk about all things personal growth, personal development, and becoming your best self. My name is David Sage, and I am a self-worth and confidence coach with Sage Coaching Solutions. You know that exact tightening in your chest when you make a choice you know you shouldn't have made? You set yourself an alarm to wake up tomorrow morning and do your workout. Tomorrow morning comes. The alarm goes off. You hit snooze. It goes off again. You hit snooze. It goes off again. You turn it off and you sleep in. And when you wake up, there's this heavy physical sensation sitting right behind your ribs. That feeling operates as a biological alarm bell. Your brain is registering a structural conflict between the person you say you are and the action that you just took. And it's not a fun feeling, which is why most of us run from that feeling. We build elaborate stories to make it go away. We rationalize, make excuses, and try to forget it altogether. But what you do in the 3 seconds after that alarm bell goes off has huge implications for your personal growth and development. Today, we're discussing the mechanics of cognitive dissonance. We're going to look at exactly what happens in your brain when your beliefs collide with your behavior. We'll look at why this creates so much friction in our lives. And then I'll show you how to both utilize this discomfort and build a tolerance to it for when you need it. You'll learn how to use it as a compass to match your daily habits with your deepest values. But before we get into it, our goal with this podcast is to share free, helpful tools with you and anyone you know who is looking to improve their life. So take action, subscribe, and share this podcast with them. When we set standards for ourselves, we eventually encounter a moment where our behavior splits from that standard. We hold a clear picture of who we want to be. Then we take an action that directly contradicts that picture. We hit snooze on the workout. We agree to a commitment we know that we don't have time for. We lose our temper after promising to stay calm. Immediately, our brain starts generating a story to explain that gap. We convince ourselves that the original goal was unrealistic anyways. We build a logical defense for why we dropped the ball. Anything to get away from the discomfort. Leon Festinger formalized this exact psychological experience in 1957. He mapped out a fundamental human drive to keep our internal world structurally consistent. When you hold two psychologically incompatible ideas, it produces a deep negative tension. Festinger discovered that this tension operates exactly like physical hunger or thirst. It functions as one of our primary driving states. Your brain compulsively motivates you to execute an adjustment to restore your internal equilibrium. The intensity of this tension operates on a precise, measurable scale. Your brain constantly weighs your conflicting actions against all of your relevant beliefs. As the personal importance of those conflicting elements increases, the psychological tension grows exponentially. When you care deeply about honesty, telling a small lie creates a massive internal spike. The tension created is beyond palpable. It crosses a threshold that forces you to intervene and stop the pain. Modern neuroscience gives us a clear window into how this sequence happens inside your head. When you encounter information that contradicts your behavior, a region called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex detects the discrepancy. This region serves as your brain's executive monitoring hub. It generates a powerful signal. Researchers call this an error-related negativity signal. Your brain literally registers your actions as a fundamental processing error within your self-regulating system. This is the start of the alarm. That abstract cognitive conflict immediately transfers to a different region called the anterior insula. Now, don't get too caught up on the names of these different sections of the brain. It's much more important to just follow what's happening. This new area handles visceral emotional processing. It translates the mental inconsistency into physical affective discomfort. This is that tightness in your chest. It's also the pit in your stomach. Your brain uses your physical biology to force you to pay attention to the error. We usually react to this physical pain with a defensive rationalization. The executive control networks in another area of your brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex step in to manage this discomfort. They execute cognitive reevaluations and start to restructure your attitudes. Here we actively filter out objective data. We inflate the desirable attributes of the easy choice that we made. We attack the character of the people who uphold the standards that we just failed to meet. The most fascinating part of this happens in the final area, the ventral striatum. This part tracks the subjective value you assign to your choices. When you rationalize a poor decision, your brain physically updates the neural encoding of your personal preferences. You rewire your own reward system to prefer the excuse. We alter our memory structures and shift our values to make the physical discomfort stop. When you leave this specific neurochemical cascade unmanaged, you unknowingly update your brain to accept the exact behaviors that you wanted to change. We need to start treating this internal tension as an automatic data notification. Think about the dashboard in your car. When your check engine light comes on, you pull the car into the shop to fix the engine. You use the light as information. When you feel that tension in your chest, your brain is doing the exact same thing. It means your actions have diverged from your values. The feedback loop is both objective and real. Cognitive dissonance provides the exact same objective feedback loop for your emotional life. We use this tension to enforce behavioral compliance with our deeply held beliefs. Elliot Aronson developed a clinical framework called the induced hypocrisy paradigm. Here's how this mechanism works in practice. Step 1 is making a public commitment to a standard. You tell your friends you're giving up complaining. You advocate for a socially beneficial standard. This anchors your self-concept to that specific norm. Step 2 is the reality check. Researchers call this transgression salience. You're prompted to privately recall your own personal failures to meet that exact standard. You realize you spent the entire morning complaining about the weather and traffic. Because you already publicly committed to the standard, it's going to be really hard to deny its validity. The path of least resistance to resolve your physiological pain becomes direct behavioral adoption. The path of least resistance quickly becomes to align your behaviors directly with your value. This is the fastest way to get rid of the psychological pain. So here we're using the discomfort of feeling like a hypocrite as fuel. Empirical research shows that people put through this paradigm display significantly higher rates of long-term behavioral compliance. I often see a related dynamic in coaching when people try to build new habits. We try to bribe ourselves with massive rewards to force the habit to stick. The science points to a different approach called low external justification. When you perform a difficult task for a very small reward, your brain experiences high cognitive dissonance. A tiny reward provides an insufficient explanation for all of your hard work. Your mind has to resolve the inconsistency, to explain why you're working so hard. And the way that it resolves this tension is by internalizing the value of the activity and the effort itself. You convince yourself the effort was intrinsically meaningful. By relying on these micro incentives, it forces your brain to permanently boost your intrinsic motivation. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because we did an entire episode on intrinsic motivation. And just to clarify, intrinsic motivation has lots of definitions. We are intrinsically motivated to do many different things. But the type of intrinsic motivation that we talked about in that episode and that we're talking about here is building an internal reward system, a form of intrinsic motivation for doing hard things, for effort in and of itself. This same drive for consistency shapes how we connect with other people. There's a fascinating psychological concept called the Ben Franklin effect. If you want someone to view you more favorably, you ask them for a small favor. When they help you, they experience dissonance between their helpful action and their neutral or negative attitude towards you. In order to reconcile this discrepancy, they update their evaluation of you to align with their helpful behavior. Their brain reasons that they must like you more than they thought if they're willing to put in the effort to help you. Your brain will constantly update your reality to match your actions. Once you understand this mechanism, you can use it to steer your life in the direction you actually want to go. Now, I want to take a step back and talk about another aspect of cognitive dissonance. As we've been talking about this drive for internal consistency, we have to look at the downsides and how it limits our everyday experience. Cognitive dissonance is one of the primary reasons that we struggle to learn new things. When you encounter information that goes against a deeply held belief, your brain treats the new information as a literal threat. This is what makes lifelong learning, thinking in shades of gray, curiosity with critical thinking, intellectual humility, and rethinking things so difficult. You could be looking at an objective fact. You could be reading clear evidence, but your brain will actively filter those facts out, or at least push back hard against them to keep your current worldview intact. We reject new evidence because accepting it requires us to admit we were wrong about something. That admission causes pain. We choose to stay stuck in our outdated beliefs just to avoid the physical discomfort of changing our minds. This exact same mechanism destroys our ability to handle nuance. Life is complicated. It's messy. Multiple contradictory things can be true at the same time. You can love your family deeply and also need a break from them. You can be grateful for your job and also feel completely unfulfilled by the work you do. Cognitive dissonance hates that complexity. Your brain wants a clean, black and white story. It wants things to be simple. When we force reality into simple boxes just to relieve our internal tension, we lose touch with the actual complexity of the world. We make poor decisions because we refuse to see the whole picture. This shows up in our internal world constantly. It makes it incredibly difficult to hold conflicting emotions. We assume that we're only allowed to feel one way at a time. Human beings are actually built to hold profound grief and deep joy in the exact same afternoon. You can feel terrified about a new opportunity and completely excited about it simultaneously. When those conflicting emotions hit, our brain panics. It tries to force us to make a choice and just feel one. It tells you that you're scared. You must not be ready. You're not excited. Your brain generates that story just to resolve the dissonance and make the discomfort stop. We build emotional maturity when we allow ourselves to feel both. You can hold the fear and the excitement. You can hold the grief and the gratitude. When you stop trying to fix the emotional tension, you actually give yourself the space to experience a full, honest life. But insight without action is often just entertainment. We have to take this neurobiology and turn it into physical practice. So let's talk about some specific protocols that you can start using today to build your tolerance to dissonance and use it to align your life. Protocol number 1 is the core values affirmation. Claude Steele developed self-affirmation theory to address why we get so defensive when people point out our inconsistencies. When you receive negative feedback, especially when that negative feedback goes against a belief that you have about yourself, your brain often registers it as a massive threat to your self-integrity. You feel like your entire worth as a person is under attack. And this is natural. This is how our brain works. I've definitely felt this. But just because you feel that way doesn't mean that you have to fight back and respond that way. You can bypass this defense mechanism by uncoupling the threat from your ego. Before you walk into a difficult conversation, or before you sit down to review your own mistakes, one of the best things you can do is take a couple minutes to write about a deeply cherished principle, completely unrelated to the current threat. If you're facing criticism at work, think about your dedication to your family or a creative passion that you care about. This broadens your mental perspective and stabilizes your self-concept by reminding your brain that you are a complex person and that your identity is multifaceted. It allows you to accept critical feedback and process objective facts without feeling like you're fighting for survival. A similar strategy that many people use is they try to manage this discomfort with absolute affirmations. Now, I am actually not the biggest fan of affirmations. I think in many ways, most of the science that has been done around affirmations does not show much of a benefit. In fact, in some situations, because of cognitive dissonance, it actually shows a negative effect. But I think that affirmations, when done right, can have some positive effect, and I have used them with clients as a small supplemental tool. But back to how this relates to using this self-affirmation theory. When you try and use an absolute affirmation to remove the discomfort, like for example, you look into the mirror and say, I am completely calm and in control at all times. The research shows that this actually backfires, especially if you're already struggling with your confidence. When a statement falls outside of what you believe and what you can accept, your brain registers the discrepancy between your reality and the fake positive statement with cognitive dissonance. Making a statement that you don't believe, like you are always calm and in control at all times, creates this secondary wave of cognitive dissonance. Your prefrontal cortex will actually generate counterexamples to prove you wrong, which reinforces that negative self-evaluation. In order to use the protocol correctly, it requires process-oriented framing. You use statements centered on effort and growth. You say things like, I am someone who actively works on developing composure during difficult moments. Or, I am becoming more calm and collected every day. By keeping it believable, your brain can actually absorb the reframing affirmation. Our second protocol is the practical preach gap protocol. This takes the induced hypocrisy paradigm and turns it into a daily tool. In fact, you can execute this tonight in about 5 minutes. Write down one core principle that you publicly champion or support. Maybe you tell your kids that patience is important. Maybe you preach work-life balance to your team. Maybe you tell people the importance of taking action on a podcast. Then write down 3 recent times that you privately failed to uphold that exact same standard. Maybe you lost your temper in traffic. Maybe you emailed your staff at 10 at night. Maybe you didn't go get the oil change that you said you wanted to get. Look at the gap between the 2 lists. Let the psychological tension build. Feel the hypocrisy. Feel the dissonance. Your brain will want to immediately generate an excuse for why your situation was different. Do not let it. Sit in the discomfort. And once that tension gets almost unbearable, then we channel it into one concrete corrective action that you can take within the next 24 hours. Maybe you apologize to the person you snapped at, or you schedule a delay on your late night emails, or you go get that oil change in the next 24 hours. You use the physical discomfort of the gap to fuel your behavioral change. Protocol 3 involves building distress tolerance. ACT, or Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, gives us a tool called cognitive diffusion. When we feel the physical tension of a mistake, our thoughts start racing. We think, I'm a failure because I messed this up. Cognitive diffusion trains your mind to observe those conflicting thoughts as transient mental events rather than absolute truths driving your actions. In order to do this, you need to shift the language in your head. Take control of your conscious perspective and the stories that you tell yourself, using your self-talk to say, I'm noticing that I'm having a thought, and that thought is that I'm a failure. You detach from the thought by framing it as a passing linguistic event, not an inherent truth. It disrupts the compulsion to relieve your tension through immediate rationalization. This works alongside a concept called self as context. You view yourself as the enduring context in which experiences occur, rather than an identity defined by a single error. In this situation, using this tool, you are the sky. The thoughts and the mistakes are just the weather passing through. This physiological flexibility allows you to tolerate the discomfort of your own inconsistency long enough to execute thoughtful adjustments. We're bringing these unconscious defensive mechanisms into the light so we can actively choose our response. We are choosing to be people who can change. And our final tool is one that you should recognize if you've listened to this podcast for a while. It's thinking in shades of gray. Life is rarely lived in black and white. The mass majority of our lives is lived in various shades of gray. By embracing thinking in shades of gray, we are building a muscle, a thinking muscle, that allows you to have much more flexibility, much more accuracy, and much more balance. You find the nuance, the truth, the reality. And this muscle is the exact muscle that helps us embrace conflicting truths, that helps us deal with cognitive dissonance. Because when you see the world in its various shades of gray, as well as black and white, it becomes much more comfortable to see the caveats and contingencies and paradoxes and just let them be. Multiple things can be true at the same time. And by being a lifelong learner who thinks in shades of gray, through curiosity and critical thinking, we expand our cognitive dissonance tolerance and allow ourselves to do things like have intellectual humility, and rethink our own beliefs. Cognitive dissonance functions as a biological compass, pointing out the exact location of the gap between your actions and your truth. The first thing that you need to do to put this into practice is to notice the physical tension the next time that you make an excuse. Pause for 3 seconds and ask yourself, what core value are you trying to avoid? And remember, you are enough, and you deserve to fill up your inner cup with happiness, true confidence, and resilience. Thank you for listening to the Sage Solutions podcast. Your time is valuable, and I'm so glad you choose to learn and grow here with me. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more sage advice. One last thing. The legal language. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. No coaching-client relationship is formed. It is not intended as a substitute for the personalized advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.